DaVinci, Luminance Preserving, Simple. These options inside the color space transform node in DaVinci Resolve can either take your color grade to the next level or completely wreck it. In this video, we're going to cut through the confusion and take a deep dive into different tone mapping methods, gamut mapping methods, OOTF, what they are, what they can do, how and when to use them properly in your color grading workflow. A lot of people overcomplicate what color space transform actually does. Let's keep it simple. It's just a tool that converts footage from one color space and gamma to another. That's it. For example, if you shoot in log such as S-Log3, V-Log or Canon Log, your image looks flat, desaturated and gray straight out of the camera. That's your camera capturing a wider dynamic range and color space, meaning more data from the real world. But that is just how the camera sees the world. We need a way to translate that scientific image, such as S-Log3 in this case, into something visually correct and pleasing to us on a standard screen display, which is Rec. 709. And that's where different tone mapping methods in color space transform come to play. We're now telling DaVinci Resolve how we want to translate it. Interpreting one color space to another often involves remapping gamma, meaning distribution of brightness and darkness, preserving contrast, and controlling color saturation. Understanding this concept, we can now break down the different tone mapping methods, what they mean, and how to choose the correct one for your look. First up, it's none. This one confuses a lot of people. When you select none, it doesn't mean DaVinci Resolve is doing absolutely nothing. What it actually means is no tone mapping is applied. Resolve will still perform the gamma and gamuts conversion, so your footage moves from something like S-Log3 into your working color space. But it won't help you compress highlights or adjust contrast to make the image more display friendly. The result? Your image might look clipped, harsh, or even just plain dull. There's no automatic highlights roll-off and no contrast shaping. So why would you ever use it? Well, this option is really meant for advanced users who want full creative control. Maybe you want to build your own custom filmic tone curve using the HDR tools, curves, or contrast nodes. Or maybe you're working with a very specific LUT or power grade that already shapes the tones for you. In short, none is for users who know exactly how they want their image to behave and prefer to sculpt tone and contrast manually outside of the CST node. It's generally not recommended for beginners. Next up is clip, and this one's kinda brutal. Technically, it does apply tone mapping, but not in a subtle or cinematic way. Instead, it hard clips any values that go above the display's brightness range. That means no highlights roll-off, no smooth transitions, just a harsh cutoff. So your bright areas like clouds or reflections can suddenly look blown out and flat. Now, who would actually use this? Probably not many people in a creative workflow, but it can be useful for technical testing, like checking where your image is clipping or how far your exposure is pushing the limits. Personally, I never ever use this in a final grade. If you're ever worried about extreme values or clipping, turn on your scopes, especially waveform or false color, to monitor things accurately. Clip is not designed to look good. It's designed to show you the limits. Now we're getting into the more practical tone mapping options. The third option is called Simple. And as the name suggests, it's Resolve's most basic automatic tone mapping method. What does it do? Well, it applies a basic contrast curve and gently compresses the highlights to avoid clipping. You also get some highlights roll-off, but it's fairly generic, not filmic, not perceptually precise. So what does it mean for your grade? It means that Resolve is trying to make your footage look normal with very little effort. It's quick, automatic, and sort of visually safe. This makes Simple ideal for scenarios like quick turnarounds, where you don't have time to finesse everything, such as event videos, news coverage, or internal corporate content, or client previews, where you need a clean Rec 709 image fast, or quick social media content, where speed matters more than how it looks. The trade-offs are that simple tone mapping often lacks the cinematic polish you get from more advanced options. The rolloff can feel a little artificial, and the contrast curve might not preserve brightness or mid-tone balance in a natural way. In short, Simple is fast, clean, and plays nicely with controlled lighting or creative plugins. Just don't expect it to look cinematic out of the box. Now we're stepping into a more advanced territory. The next tone mapping option is called Luminance Preserving, and this one starts to feel a lot more filmic. As the name suggests, Luminance Preserving is designed to protect the perceived brightness of your image, especially in the highlights and mid-tones, during the gamma and gamut conversion. That means as it compresses your highlights and tones for Rec 709, it tries to avoid the usual side effects like washed out skin tones, oversaturated colors, color shifts caused by tone curve compression. In practical terms, it creates a softer highlights rolloff, maintains realistic color, and preserves local contrast in a way that resembles film-like behavior. This is especially helpful when you're grading natural light scenes like golden hour or window-lit interiors. So, Luminance Preserving strikes a nice balance between control and automation. It gives you a film curve without fully locking you into a bait-and look. Now, is it always better? Not necessarily. If you plan to do heavy tone shaping, it might compete with them or cause overcompression. But if you want a beautiful base that looks pleasing right away, with less effort, Luminance Preserving is a strong option. Let me show you an example of a simple note structure that involves Luminance Preserving as a tone mapping method in Color Space Transform. Now we will dive deep into one of the most commonly used tone mapping methods that is named after the software itself. This is the default tone mapping method, and for a good reason. DaVinci Tone Mapping uses its proprietary algorithm to smoothly compress highlights and roll off contrast in a way that looks very cinematic and filmic, but without destroying color integrity. It's engineered to work well with high dynamic range footage. It balances smooth highlights roll-off, natural contrast curves, and preserved color saturation. This makes it incredibly useful for footage that spans a wide range of lighting conditions, unlike the simple method, which just applies a generic contrast curve. DaVinci adapts based on the image's dynamic range, offering a more consistent result across different scenes. I'm going to show you a basic note tree that involves DaVinci as a tone mapping method in Color Space Transform. But again, since DaVinci Tone Mapping is already doing some shaping for you, you'll want to be careful not to double up on contrast or highlights compression in your later notes. Also, if you're aiming for a very customized film emulation workflow, you might prefer more manual control. In that case, none or simple could be a better fit. But overall, DaVinci Tone Mapping is one of the most visually pleasing, reliable, and beginner-friendly options. Perfect for cinematic, polished results that will leave room for creative grading. Finally, we have Saturation Preserving, a more technical and specialized tone mapping method in DaVinci Resolve. It's designed to solve a very specific problem. When converting from a wide gamut log space to Rec 709, some images lose saturation, especially in the highlights and bright skin tones. This can make things look washed out or just lifeless. Saturation preserving works by retaining color intensity across the image, especially when highlights are being compressed. It avoids the common issue when bright areas, like skin in sunlight or bright clothing, turn pale or desaturated after tone mapping. These are the scenarios where one might consider using saturation preserving. Overexposed skin tones to keep skin from going pale or gray, sunlit or overcast outdoor shots where you want to retain natural vibrancy in clouds, or when you want to push for bold color palettes. The problem is that it could feel more intense than DaVinci or Luminance Preserving, so your image might look too saturated at first. Conveniently, DaVinci Resolve gives you some sort of control right under this option to fine-tune this method. To unlock even more power in the color space transform, right below tone mapping, you'll find Gamut Mapping. If tone mapping helps translate brightness and contrast from one range to another, then Gamut Mapping helps control and compress color values when moving from a wide color space, like what your camera shoots, to a more limited one like Rec 709. First, it's none. As the name suggests, this option performs no gamut compression at all. Any color that falls outside the target's gamut may get hard clipped. That means you could end up with neon-like oversaturation, color artifacts, or even hue shifts that don't look natural. This option is typically reserved for advanced users who want full manual control and plan to manage gamut issues elsewhere in their node tree. So if you're newer to color grading, especially with wide gamut workflows, this is probably not the best place to start. Second is saturation compression, and this is the one I highly recommend. It's a smart and gentle way to handle colors that are oversaturated and pushing beyond the Rec 709 boundary. Instead of hard clipping them, like Clip does, it gradually compresses high saturation values as they approach the edge of the legal gamut, which helps preserve the hue while gently rolling off the intensity. There are two parameters here. Saturation knee. Think of this like a soft threshold. Below the knee, saturation stays untouched. As values rise above it, Resolve starts gradually compressing them. Saturation max. This defines the maximum saturation allowed after compression. The default is 1, and in most cases, you can just leave it there. Together, the knee and max define a smooth compression curve that prevents harsh transitions or color clipping, while still keeping the original color intent. Third, it's clip. And it does exactly what it sounds like. It forcefully clips any out-of-gamut colors right at the boundary, like hitting a wall. This can be useful for technical testing or visualizing how far your footage is pushing beyond legal gamut limits, but is generally not recommended for a polished, final look. The best way to monitor how gamut mapping affects your image is with the factor scope. When gamut mapping is set to none, you'll often see color spikes shooting beyond the Rec 709 boundary. When you switch to saturation compression, those spikes gently tuck back inside the legal limits, keeping the overall color direction, but in a cleaner, safer, and more display-friendly way. There are two little mysterious checkboxes in Color Space Transform that I personally think are widely underrated in terms of how much they can affect your final image. That's forward OOTF and inverse OOTF. First off, OOTF stands for Opto-Optical Transfer Function. I know it doesn't sound like it explains anything. Well, remember, your camera sees light in linear values. The brighter the light, the higher the number. But we humans don't perceive light that way. We see tones, highlight, midtones, and shadows in a non-linear way. OOTF acts like a perceptual translator. It helps bridge what the camera captures and how we actually see the image on the screen. Let's take forward OOTF first. This one is usually turned on by default, and is generally what you want when converting from a scene-referred gamma like S-Log3 to a display-referred gamma like Rec. 709. It applies a perceptual contrast curve, essentially helping your image look more natural, balanced, and pleasing to the eye. So when you want DaVinci Resolve to help you translate your log footage to Rec. 709 in a visually accurate way, leave forward OOTF on. Now, inverse OOTF does the opposite. This option is useful when you're going backwards. For example, you've imported Rec. 709 footage and you want to push it back into a scene-referred space like Log or DaVinci Wide Gamut for more creative control or integration into a log-based workflow. By enabling inverse OOTF, you're undoing the perceptual contrast that was already baked in, so your footage becomes more flexible for grading. The reason I say these options are criminally overlooked is because checking or unchecking them can drastically change your final image. So I always double check these boxes to ensure they match your pipeline direction. If you're aiming for high-end cinematic results, you don't want to go straight from Log to Rec. 709. That's too limiting. Instead, we can take advantage of DaVinci Wide Gamut Intermediate as our working color space. It gives us more headroom, color flexibility, and dynamic range to push our grade without breaking the image. So your color pipeline becomes S-Log3 to DaVinci Wide Gamut Intermediate to Rec. 709. Let's break it down in a simple, powerful note tree. Note 1 is our input CST. It converts your camera's log footage into a wide working space. This note doesn't apply any perceptual contrast or compression yet. It just preps your footage for grading inside a wider and more flexible space. Note 2 is primary adjustments. Do your main grading work here. Now that you're in DaVinci Wide Gamut, this is your playground. Use native Resolve tools to dial in exposure, contrast, white balance, and color balance, all while preserving highlights and color integrity. Note 3 is creative look, LUT or film emulation. This is where you build a creative look using native tools or apply a LUT as long as it's designed for wide gamut, or insert a film emulation plugin like Dehancer Pro. Note 4 is output CST. This transforms the image into a Rec. 709 display referred space. This final transform maps your beautifully graded image into standard Rec. 709, ready for YouTube, online platforms, or general display. To wrap up, getting familiar with color space transform, it's about building a workflow that's efficient, predictable, and visually consistent. I hope this video helped clear up some of the mystery around color space transforms and gave you a solid foundation to build on. Got questions? Drop them in the comment section below. Happy grading, and I'll see you in the next video.